If you know various DevOps tools like Git, Jenkins, Maven, Ansible, Docker, Kubernetes, and are not sure how collaboratively does it work, or you are someone who wish to know what is the logical flow of your DevOps project, or you would like to set up a complete CI/CD pipeline using various DevOps tools, then this course is for you. Welcome to Simple DevOps Project. My name is A.R. Shankar. I will be your instructor for this course. In this course, we are going to create a complete CI/CD pipeline to build and deploy a Java application. During this learning journey, we are going to use Git as a local version control system, GitHub as a distributed version control system, Jenkins as a continuous integration tool, Maven as a build tool, Ansible for configuration management and deployment tool, Docker for containerization, and Kubernetes as a container management tool. We are going to set up all this environment on AWS. Now let's see how these tools are going to fit in our DevOps workflow. Usually we have the source code with the developers, and developers commit that code onto the distributed version control system during the development phase. Then we need to build this code, right? For that we are going to use the continuous integration tool called Jenkins. Once Jenkins builds the code, it generates artifacts. Those artifacts we need to deploy it onto the target environment. So we need some tool which can able to deploy the artifacts on the target environment. In our case, we are going to use Ansible as a deployment tool, and it can able to deploy our applications on a VM or a Docker container or Kubernetes. In our case, initially we will deploy our application on a VM, then we are going to deploy it on a Docker container. At last, we are going to deploy it on a Kubernetes. By end of this course, we could able to set up this complete CI/CD pipeline. Hope this has given you a fair idea of what do we cover during this program. And I will share more details about this course in my next video. Thank you and see you there. During this DevOps project, we are going to deploy our application on three different kind of target environments. Initially, we are going to deploy it on a VM, I mean to say virtual machine. Second one is on a Docker container. At last on a Kubernetes cluster. To start with, initially we are going to build and deploy our application on a Tomcat server. For this, we are going to set up CI/CD pipeline with help of GitHub, Jenkins, Maven, and Tomcat. By this time, we don't have any environment, so we are going to start with setting up a Jenkins server, then set up and configure Maven and Git. Next, set up Tomcat server. Next, integrating GitHub, Maven, Tomcat server with Jenkins. Then we are going to create a CI/CD Jenkins job, and we are going to see how we can build and deploy it on a Tomcat server. Once deployment is done, we are going to test our deployment. By this time, we have a environment with Git, GitHub, Jenkins, Maven, Tomcat. We can able to commit our code onto GitHub, and Jenkins is going to pull the code from GitHub, build with help of Maven, and deploy it on a Tomcat server. Next thing, we are going to see how we can deploy our artifacts on a Docker container. For this, we are going to use GitHub, Jenkins, Maven, and Docker. In this section, we are going to see how to set up Docker environment. Why? Because GitHub, Jenkins, Maven is already exist. Then we are going to see how to write a Docker file. Next, creating an image and container on Docker host. Next, integrating Docker host with Jenkins. At last, we are going to create a CI/CD job on Jenkins to build and deploy on a container. By this time, we have an environment in the similar way as we have seen earlier, but instead of deploying on a VM, we are going to deploy it on a Docker container. Next thing, we are going to see how we can deploy it on a container with help of Ansible. So here we are going to use GitHub, Jenkins, Maven, Ansible, and Docker. Here we are going to see how to set up Ansible server. Next, integrating Docker host with Ansible. Next, Ansible playbook to create an image, and Ansible playbook to create an container, and integrating Ansible with Jenkins. At last, we are going to create a CI/CD job to build code on Ansible and deploy it on a Docker container. By this time, we are going to set up this environment where we are going to pull the code from GitHub, build with help of Maven, and create artifacts with help of Ansible, commit those onto the Docker Hub, and also we are going to have Ansible playbook to deploy on a Docker container. Next, we are going to see how to build and deploy artifacts on Kubernetes. So most of the environment is ready by this time except Kubernetes. So we are going to set up Kubernetes on AWS. Here we will use a service called EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service. Next, write pod, service, and deployment manifest files. I will show you how to write it. Next, integrating Kubernetes with Ansible. Next, Ansible playbooks to create deployments and services. At last, we are going to create a CI/CD job to build code on Ansible deploy it on a Kubernetes cluster. By this time, we could be able to similar kind of this environment, but instead of Docker host, we are going to deploy our applications on Kubernetes cluster. Hope this information have given enough idea what we are going to cover during this program. I believe it is going to be more interesting while doing it. Hopefully, I can see you inside the course. Hey guys, welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to see what is continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment. To demonstrate this one, I will just jump onto AWS official website. This is AWS official website, and if you see this diagram, here it is explaining about what is continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment. First, let's understand what is continuous integration. Usually, we have our source code in our local workstations. From there, we will commit it into the version control system or source code management system. In our case, we are going to use Git as our version control system. Once code is available over here, our continuous integration tool is going to pull the code automatically, build that code and run unit tests. Then we call it as a continuous integration process. During this continuous integration process, we are going to build our source code or compile our source code and generate artifacts. Once artifacts are generated, we need to deploy these on target environments. Target environments may be changed based on the project necessities. It may be a staging, test, dev, QA, pre-prod, prod, like that various environments we might have. Now let's take that we want to deploy artifacts on the staging environment. Once it is deployed in the staging environment, we do the regression test and performance test. Once it is passed these tests, we can deploy it into the production environment. During this deployment process, nothing but after build, we are going to deploy it into the staging, then production. If we could able to do this without any manual intervention, then we call it as a continuous deployment. In the continuous deployment, you can automatically deploy it into the staging environment, automatically deploy it into the production environment. Whereas, if we need a manual intervention or some approvals while deploying into a production environment, then we are going to call it as a continuous delivery. In continuous delivery, we need a manual approval. Let's try to apply same thing to our project. This is our DevOps project which we are going to develop during this course. In this case, we have source code on our local workstation and will commit it into the GitHub. Once code is available in GitHub, our continuous integration tool Jenkins is going to pull the code and build with help of Maven. If this process is going to happen automatically, then we are going to call it as a continuous integration. Similar way, once the artifacts are generated, it will be copied onto the Ansible. Ansible is going to make it as a containerized application by creating an image, and it also going to deploy the code onto the Kubernetes. This is also going to happen automatically, so we call it as a continuous delivery. But to do the continuous deployment, we may need the more than one environment. But anyway, if we could able to achieve this, we can able to achieve the continuous deployment as well. Hope you have understand how we are going to use continuous integration and continuous delivery in this project. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Hello guys, welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to see what and all resources do we require to proceed with this course. First of all, we are going to set up our DevOps environment on AWS Cloud. That is where we need an AWS account. We are going to use AWS free tier account, which will cover most of the services which we are going to use in this DevOps training. However, some of those services could be chargeable. I will try to alert you wherever it is possible. But it is always better and validate your billing dashboard once in a while if you are practicing this course. I have already logged into my Veloxy Technologies account, and you can check here my billing dashboard. By going here, you can validate your billing dashboard. In case there is a abnormal in your billing, you can immediately try to validate your resources. This is one of the best way to avoid surprises in your billing. Next thing, you should create your own GitHub account. I have my GitHub account called Vayankil, and this is where we have the source code and some of the documentation which you need to use in this course. So we are going to use a Java project during this course, that is Hello World, and you need to fork this code into your account. How to fork it? Just click on this one. You could see an option over here, fork. Whenever you log into your account, you can see a fork option is enabled. Why it is grayed out over here? Because I have logged into my own account. Then we need a mobile extern. In case if you are using a Windows system, mobile external or putty, which are going to helpful for you to connect to a Linux system. In case if you are in Mac or Linux operating systems, you don't require it. Why? Because you can connect from the terminal or else from Linux prompt to the Linux system. It is only required in case if you are using a Windows operating system. Next thing, we should install Git. So Git for Windows, you can just search for Git for Windows and you can download and install it. I have already installed Git on my workstation. So Git bash. Okay, this is Git bash. Once you have installed Git, you can see this one. Git minus version, if I check, it is having 2.30. Okay, and the latest one is 2.33. However, you can install this latest version. In case if you are using Mac OS, this is the procedure you should follow to install on Mac OS. For Linux systems, you can download it from your Linux distribution like yum or apt, whatever operating system you have. So these are the resources are required for now. In case there is any additional resources we need in going forward sessions, I will let you know. If you are not sure how to set up these accounts, I have added a last section called resources. Please go there and check it out to create these accounts or configuring it. That's all for this lecture and see you in the next lecture.